Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Before we get started, I want to give a quick check to make sure that you can see me and that you can hear me. So if a couple of you could just kind of tweet in the chat box, not tweet, but just kind of send a message in the chat box that you can hear me and that you can see me, we can go ahead and get started. So I don't have anything just yet. Okay, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you so much. So welcome to today's seminar or webinar. We'll be together for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so, and we're going to be talking about tips for successful careers in industry in a changing global economy. I'm Dr. Marquita Qualls of Entropia Consulting, and again, we are just going to be walking through a couple of things today. First of all, a couple of housekeeping issues. This Emerging Researchers National Conference in STEM, this webinar is a part of that series. The ERN Conference in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics is hosted by AAAS and the NSF Division of Human Resource Development. The conference is aimed at helping college, university, undergraduate, and graduate students who participate in these programs funded by the NSF HRD unit, including underrepresented minorities and persons with disabilities. The ERN conference and ERN provides STEM majors it provides STEM majors a chance to present their research and participate in professional development and an educational career fair. This webinar is a part of that series to share information and resources to you, those of you in STEM careers, about career options and pathways. And as a reminder, the ERN conference will be held February 21st through 23rd of next year in Washington, D.C. Take a quick note of the website where you can find more information on ERN and the conference. It's at new.emerging-researchers.org. Again, the conference is coming up in February 21st to 23rd in Washington, D.C. So please visit the website to learn more information about the conference and register. What are we going to be talking about today? This is the fun part. This is why you're here, learning about industry. So we're going to spend a bit of a time talking about industry culture and surveying the landscape. So there'll be several different topics that we'll address on industry culture. Then we'll move into the actual job search process, from your resume, the application, interviewing, and the offer. Workplace dynamics. What does that mean? Once you get the job, how do you learn, how do you perform, and how do you grow? And mixed into all of this, we're going to talk about some social standards, creating and maintaining your digital footprint. Because as we all know, things have changed, and our social media platforms, our digital footprint is a very important and critical part of the job search for today. So first of all, who am I? Who is Dr. Q, and why is she a person that can be talking to me about a career in industry? Well, a bit about myself is I have my bachelor's and PhD in chemistry from Tennessee State University, which is an HBCU located in Nashville, Tennessee. And I did my graduate work, my PhD in chemistry and bioorganic at Purdue University. Then I had to make the decision, where do I go? Do I want to do a postdoc or do I want to go right into industry? I chose to go into industry and I moved into big pharma. I worked at GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceutical Company, which is located headquartered. The U.S. headquarters is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. While I was there, I had great opportunities, and I had a broad range of R&D career roles spanning from the actual bench, what we know as just bench research. So I was doing pure science. And then I was able to move into the management or non-scientific or non-bench roles into global strategic planning. That allowed me to explore the business side of the science. And I know that's something that a lot of people want to really jump into. You know that you've done research all of your undergraduate and potentially your graduate years. And when you start to work, you want to learn about more than just the bench. Well, my career path allowed me to do that. So I was exploring the business side of the science because that's just as, if not important, as us doing the lab work or doing the work in the lab. I'm a little tongue-tied today. I'm not sure why. Then I took the big jump. I decided that I wanted to do something else. I love science. I love research, but I also like people. I also, because I'm a scientist and I like solving problems, I also want to help people in other organizations solve their problems. So it only makes sense that I then started my own company. It's called Entropia Consulting, which is here now. I'll be celebrating 10 years in February, as a matter of fact. It's a solopreneur, entrepreneur, solopreneur, which just means that it's just me for my company. And I focus on strategy and operations, leadership and professional development, and STEM diversity. But I'm able to do this all because I started out with a research career in a STEM field. So most of my clients and most of the audiences that I speak to do have STEM backgrounds. And again, it's all because I started out where you are right now, doing undergraduate research, doing graduate research, and then moving into industry and having a very successful career, a rewarding career in industry, which allowed me to now have my own company. So you know a little bit about me. I want to learn a little bit about you. So this webinar is going to be interactive, and there will be several places throughout the webinar where we'll be asking you poll questions. And so the first poll question we'll be pulling up, it is about what is your classification? So I'm having help. Someone's helping me with the poll questions. And the first question, is it pulled up now? Yes, it's open. And I just need to know, what is your classification? I see some of you are putting them in the chat in the questions area. There is a poll on the screen that we're also trying to capture that data there as well. So if you are dialed in on a webinar, there should be an area for you to click. And if not, then continue to put them in the questions area. So I do see student planning on graduate school, grad school. We have some career center professionals here. Very good. We're going to keep it open a little bit longer to give you an opportunity to participate. And I'm going to ask, Tarek, if you can hear me, can you kind of let me know what's going on with the polling? I see the screen. There we go. I see now. So 52% graduate students, awesome. 12% undergrads, 8% faculty, and then we have some other. Yes, very good. Okay, that gives me an idea, because as we go along with the webinar, thank you for participating. I think we can close out the poll now. So the majority of us on the webinar today are graduate students. And as I said, that helps me, because as we go along and I try to give some examples, I understand the perspective where most of you are coming from. So you're on the job market, you are in graduate school, you're going to be going on the job market, and you want to know some of the things that you need to be looking out for. Perfect. Great. I want to remind you, if you have questions as we go along the way, feel free to type them into the question box. And though we will have a Q&A at the end of the session, if you have questions and I see them as we're going along, I'll be able to answer your questions real time and not just have to wait until the end of the, not to the end of the end of the sessions. So we're ready to go on to the next slides. We shared our poll results, and you should be able to see You should be able to see we're having slight technical difficulties, so I apologize for this. There we go. So workplace culture. I'm sure you've heard people say there's a difference between the academy, between industry, and government. And true enough, there is. But what does that actually mean? And how do you begin to determine what that looks like when you are getting ready for your job search? Because if you want to be successful in industry, you really have to understand and make sure that you have a fit for industry, or basically a fit for any job that you're going into. Let's look at the academy. We'll look at this in terms of your working style, projects, research focus, funding, recognition, and the career motivation. Now, mind you, there's several other categories that we could look at when we're trying to compare or contrast academia, industry, and government. But I want to really focus or hone in on these 6 areas. So when we think about academia and the working style, it's typically independent. You're typically working on your own projects, and that's where the autonomy comes in. You're able to decide what you want to work on, when you want to work on, for the most part. And the research focus is exploratory. You're trying to see what can you find. You're answering questions. So you're exploring, you're digging deep. That funding that allows you to do that exploratory research, it comes from grants. Grants, sometimes you may have private donors, you may have foundation money, but that's where typically your monies are coming from to fund your research. And when, in terms of recognition, how do people know what it is that you're doing, or what type of recognition do people in the academy typically seek out in addition to the awards? We look at for publications. It's really nice to be able to say, hey, I'm published in this journal, or I'm published in that journal, and then you have your index numbers. That's the recognition that primarily drives someone who wants to have a career in industry. Now, it's not an end all be all, and it definitely doesn't apply to everyone, but these are general characteristics for a career in industry and the best fit. Career motivation, tenure. If you go along the academic track, and particularly on the faculty and the researcher track, your career motivation, your end goal is to get tenure. So your first 6 years on the job, 4 to 6 years on the job, you are working to produce results to get tenure. Now let's look at government. Government working style, it's teams, it's groups. The projects are those that are addressing some area of public welfare. And the research focus then means that the research will be on those projects that meet the needs of our country. The funding is from the federal budgets. Recognition, similar to the academy, where you have publications, but then you also have to remember that when you work in government, there are publications, but there's also FOIA, that's Freedom of Information Act. So that means that anything that you're doing in the governmental realm or the governmental space, it is public knowledge, and everyone or anyone has access to that because of the Freedom of Information Act. The career motivation, I'm sure you've heard this time and time again. You get a career in the government, you're set for life. And so it really does become a time of service. You're working, and because you're serving the needs of the country, that time of service really does become your career motivation. So we've talked about the academy, we've talked about government. Now let's look at what it means to work in industry. So what does that fit in industry? If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in and I will address them along the way. I'll keep saying that because I want this to be as interactive as possible. I'm talking to a screen, but you can see me and you see the slides. So help me out here. The working style in industry is like that of government. You are working in teams. However, the projects are based on the business targets. I'm sure many of you have heard when you work in industry, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about the business. And that's true because the research focus is about application. You're not doing things solely for the purpose of exploratory research. It has to be something that will eventually produce a product, or it will be research that's leading to or supporting another project that leads to a product. Because the funding that comes from your research and industry, it comes from the sales revenue or profits that the company has made the prior year. It's unlike grants where you're submitting a grant to a foundation or to a public charity or to the government or NSF or NIH organization. The funding for your projects in industry come 95% from the sales and revenue and profits from that particular um, product for that year. And so that's why in industry, you hear people say it's very fast paced and we work on one project today and then you go in the next day, they've told us we no longer work on that project. It's because if you're working on something that no longer meets the needs of the company and their business targets, then it stops right there. There is no, oh, well, let me just finish out these experiments next week. Doesn't work that way. You end that project right then, right there, and then you move on to the next one. Recognition, when you're in industry, what type of recognition do people get or do people typically like to receive? It's when you see your product that has made the market or you're able to receive a patent. It's less about publications in industry because while there are groups who are able to publish, it's far less common because publications put things in the public sector and within industry, your work needs to be really more confidential and you're not able to share as widely because if you are trying to launch a product, you have the competitors that are out there that can see what you're doing. And definitely if you want to have patented material, you can't share your research findings in the public space. Career motivation, people want to move up and their career motivation would be for promotion and tenure. So I hope this little chart was helpful for you to really understand and get you to thinking, where do I really want to go? I thought I wanted to be in industry, but if it really is that big of a change or that big of a moving target, maybe I like the autonomy of the academy better. Or maybe I really do like the greater good of the country and I want to work on that end. So let me see about a governmental career. But if you like the fast pace, if you like something that, you'll be able to see your work on the market eventually, maybe industry is really the place for you. And we'll talk through that some more as we go along the webinar and the presentation. Another thing to think about when you're talking about workplace culture, it's not just whether you go into industry, but once you get in industry, there are various sectors in which you can land. So you see the little guidepost here, which way do you want to go? Biotech, research. These are also some functions that you can do within various industries and sectors. This list is not exhaustive. It's just a snapshot of the few industries that are pretty relevant to our work in STEM fields. So you have the consumer sector, and within the consumer sector, you have the food and beverage industry, you may have retail. So you think about consumer products. Even on the pharmaceutical side, so over-the-counter drugs, those things are considered the consumer market, which is separate from where you see down where it says pharmaceuticals. So when you're working in pharmaceuticals, that's the area where you think about your prescription drugs. But if you're over-the-counter or consumer, like your Tylenols or your aspirins or ibuprofens that you can buy over the counter, that falls into the consumer products end. And then you have your chemicals area, petroleum, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, energy, professional service, utilities. So it's actually a pretty broad list. And when you think about, oh, I want to work in industry, and when you're going out and you're networking and you tell people that, hey, I want to work in industry, you can start to think and be a little bit more specific about what you mean because there are several fields in industry for you to apply and use your talents. Geography also matters when you start thinking about the culture and the fit and the sector. Let me ask another poll question here. And this question is going to be about what's most important to you when you're selecting a job. So if we can pull up that poll now, the poll is now open. And you tell me what's most important when you're selecting a job. Location, salary, location. So while they're answering the poll, someone did just type in a question, what's the role of a researcher in professional services field? You have to think about professional services maybe in the line of consulting And as a researcher, you can be a consultant. So you use your technical knowledge, you use your expertise, and you're able to join maybe one of the larger consulting firms or a boutique firm. But that's where, and that's one of the ways that you can apply your expertise as a researcher in the professional services field. Thank you for that question. So about 50% of you, which is really interesting, this is surprising to me. I wouldn't have thought this, but about 50%, and we can go ahead and close the poll out now. About 50% of you say that location is most important when you're selecting a job. 25% think that it's salary, 21% is the culture, and about 4% of you say other. And that's really interesting. And I'm glad you guys are starting to think about that, because being successful in industry or being successful in any job, really there are a lot of components. That's right, the two body problem, the two body issue. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a problem. There's a two body situation that you have to contend with. So when you're thinking about that, location does matter, because you want to be successful. Success is not just about how many papers you're producing or how many products that you have on the market. You have to be able to be, there's a lot of talk now about making sure that we're taking care of our mental and emotional health. Location does matter. And so if you are the type of person that knows that you have a family on the East Coast, but you are really, really interested in oils and gas industry, then if you look at this map, you see that most of the petrochemicals, you'll see that most of the petrochemicals industries are in the southern part of the United States. So somewhere between Texas and Mississippi, Alabama. If that's not somewhere that you know that you will be happy in living in terms of location, then that may not be the best place for you to go, especially when all of your family is on the East Coast. And you may have you may be more prone to East Coast living, right? Location matters. So as you are starting to think about your job and being successful, I also want you to think about where and what part of the country are most of the industries or sectors in which you're interested. And so biotechs tend to be, kind of congregated on the West Coast. That's not to say that there aren't any biotech companies in the Midwest or in the South or on the East Coast. But if you do a map and you map out where all of the biotechs are, you're going to find that a large amount of them are on the West Coast. And again, they're petrochemical companies are in the South. That's not to say that you don't have any in the Midwest, but the concentration of them and where they're popular, it does, and they do land in the southern part of the state. And then the pharmaceutical companies typically are on the eastern seaboard. So that matters. Location matters, geography matters. And the other things that you see here on the map, I just kind of threw this in here. These are the national labs and where all of the national labs are located. And so if you were considering a government career and wanted to work at a national lab, then these are your options. These are your choices. The last thing I want to talk about in workplace culture and understanding the components of what it means to be successful in industry. And these are things that we don't talk a lot about when you're going through your graduate career. We don't talk about them a lot because we're a lot focused on our research, but culture matters. And when you think about the workplace and the makeup of the workplace, today's workplace can consist of up to 5 generations. Had you ever thought about that? 5 generations. So we're working with people who could have been born right at 1997 up to people who have been born before 1946. And so there is a wide range of generations. There's a wide range of ideas and thought processes for the people with whom you will be working. And that matters. So we're not going to get into any age discrimination issues or topics with the workplace. But what this means is when you're starting to look at your company and culture and the type of work that you're doing and you want to be successful, these are the things that you'll have to consider. You'll be learning from people who are older than you, but you'll also be learning from people who may be younger than you. You may have a manager or a supervisor who is younger than you. You may be managing or supervising someone who is your parents, or in some cases, maybe even your grandparents' age. Those are the types of things that you'll have to consider when you're thinking about the workplace and your ultimate success. So if you have any questions about culture, then please type them in and we can start to address those. If not, let's move on to the meat of the presentation. And I think why you're really here and what you want to learn is about your job search strategies. Now, we'll say this. They're very simple, but what it will take is time, and you'll have to invest some time into doing these things. When you think about job search strategies, first and foremost, you think about this: knowing yourself. We just went through the thing talking about culture, but you really have to know yourself. What are your strengths? What is your working style? And then what are your preferences? That's the foundation for your job search. You've really got to know your strengths, know what you're good at, know your working style. Do you prefer the independent working style? Do you prefer teams? Do you prefer kind of a hybrid of both? Preferences in terms of location, preferences in terms of, the type of work that you're doing. So once you get those things down and understood, then that's really going to help guide your job search strategy. Now, that's not to say that that's the only place that you can look. However, I will say that if you want to be successful and you're going to be happy in moving to your job and job search, be very strategic about what you're doing and the jobs that you're seeking so that you won't find yourself being on the job for 6 months and saying, oh no, this isn't working out. Let me move on to something else. And then you'll have to start the process all over. So first and foremost in your job search strategy, know yourself. The next question, the next point in your job search strategy is research those jobs and the companies. And I have to emphasize and the companies because a lot of times we get so caught up in the job title and the position that we forget to research the company. What skills are needed at that company? Who needs your skills? And then what are the values for those particular companies? We've seen, and if you're on the job market, if you've had friends who've been on the job market, if you have friends who are in industry, here's the hard cold fact of industry, and it goes back to the funding model and the business needs. There are things that will change. There will be what we call redundancy. People can be made redundant. There's a reduction of workforce. Some people call it laid off. As you're going through your job search and your strategy, not only look at the jobs, but look at the company, look at the company's history, look to see what direction the company is going in. You can find out so many things by just you can go to Yahoo Finance and look at the company that way. So a lot of times we focus on only job boards when we're looking at our strategies. We also need to look at the health or history of the company. You can do that online. As I said, you could do it at Yahoo Finance. You can do it on LinkedIn. You can also do it by talking to people. Talk to people who work at that company and find out, what do you guys really do there? What skills do you use and apply when you're working in this job at that company? These things are very important because as we go forward with the presentation and you start thinking and going through your application process, you'll begin to see, well, you know what, that really is important. I need to understand what this company values. And maybe I'm not as good of a fit for this company as I thought. I'm a better fit for company B rather than company A. And then use multiple channels. Online job boards, career fairs. So during this conference season, most conferences do have career fairs. Make sure that you're going to the career fairs. Make sure that you are meeting people at the career fairs. Make sure you go to the booths. Make sure you talk to people. That's where you will probably have your greatest success in your job search is by talking to people to see what's out there. They may refer you back to a job board, but your first step is actually talking and making that interaction and networking. And we'll also talk about using social media platforms. Again, LinkedIn, Twitter. People don't use Facebook as much, but opportunities are out there. People are always looking for someone to fill this position or someone to fill that position. And you don't want to miss out by saying, well, I'm looking for a job. I'm not going to look on social media. I'm only going to look on job boards. I'm only going to look in news magazines where they have careers at the end. Make sure that you have a comprehensive search and you're utilizing multiple channels. And one place that you definitely want to make sure that you're looking at is the AAAS Science Careers website. They are actually a great resource for identifying jobs and opportunities, as well as some career tips. So make sure you're visiting that as well. Job search strategies, just to kind of recap. First and foremost, what's most important is knowing you, knowing what your strengths are. Then doing the research on the companies and the jobs, and then utilizing multiple channels. So there's a process in all of this, and it doesn't magically happen. There's an active process and things that you have to do. And then you have your resume. Here's something that I want you to keep in mind. Resumes get interviews. You can write that down on a little sticky pad or something that always kind of help you remember. Resumes get interviews. And with that, how do you create a resume that will get you that interview? First and foremost, your resume is not your complete life history on 1 to 2 pages. What you want to do when you're creating your resumes, and this is why you always hear people say that you can have multiple resumes for various jobs or various applications. So if you want a resume that's going to get you an interview, first thing you need to do is examine the job description or the posting for that particular job or for that particular role. So you want to pay attention to the responsibilities required and the qualifications that are sought. Then what you want to do is emphasize or highlight the skills that the employers note that they value in new hires. And where you're going to get that from, if you remember from our previous slide, you're going to be talking to people and you're going to examine the companies. You're going to do research on them and you'll be able to see what they actually value. And you're going to sprinkle those throughout your resume. Not just randomly, not just having the words that are there, but you want to be able to demonstrate your, and I put CAP in parentheses because sometimes we may not have the ability, we may not have demonstrable evidence of us being able to do the job, but we have what we call those transferable skills, and that's what makes you capable of performing the job. So when you're doing your resume, you want to make sure that you demonstrate your capabilities as well as your abilities to perform the job based on that particular job description. And use action verbs. Make sure that you are letting people know that you actually did something. Here's another rule of thumb. If you look at your resume, and if your resume looks very generic or it looks like anyone else could be doing the same thing, then you know that you've not used enough action verbs. You don't want your resume to look like a job description. You want your resume to actually highlight what you have actually done. You want, for example, you don't want to necessarily have on there and your responsibilities, maintain lab culture facilities or maintain solvents in make sure that the lab is kept clean. Anyone could do that. But if you were to say that what would we say? Like with the solvents, that you were in charge of making sure that 50 solvents or 50 solvents or maintaining the inventory for 50 solvents in the cabinet, that starts to let me know what specifically you did and specific numbers, and it's not just something that anyone could do. If that's not clear, give me some questions or send me some questions along that line. But again, make sure that your resume is specific for you, it's unique to you, and not something that's kind of generic that anyone could use, and it's not just a job description. That it's not a copy of a job description. Because I've seen that too many times where people are saying, oh, well, I'll just write what they have in the job description on my resume. That's a no-no. I need to be able to understand what you specifically did on your resume. And so with that, Think in terms of the benefits that you can offer the employer instead of just presenting your skills. This does take time. I know it takes time and I know it takes energy and effort, but I promise you, if you will carve out the time, energy, and effort to work on your resume and think about how you present each one that you're using to apply for a job, and make sure that you're emphasizing the skills that the employers want, you're using action verbs, and you're actually demonstrating what you did and what your contributions were, I guarantee you, you're going to have much more success in landing interviews. I promise. What skills do the employers want? What are the key skills that employers want? Communication, computer skills, communication in terms of oral and written skills. So you'll be doing a lot of presenting when you do an industry, whether it's presenting to your teammates or whether it's presenting to the larger teams. Communication is very important. And also, when we talk about this global economy, you'll be doing a lot of written communication. You may not be able to do a face-to-face meeting, but you'll have to communicate your information succinctly and clearly in an email or in a report. So that becomes very important. Customer service. I know you're saying, oh, I'm not in a customer service role. Why is that important? It's important because you need to be able to treat your colleagues, to treat your peers, and potential clients. You treat them very well, and that's where the customer service comes into play, where you're delivering on what it is that you say that you're delivering, and people appreciate that. Because again, it's all about the business. And when you go to businesses, you want to have good customer service. The team working, technical skills, attention to detail, those are all things that we typically know about. But I want you to also think more about your critical thinking skills, your entrepreneurial thinking. And entrepreneurial thinking is one that's becoming more and more needed and popular in the industry today, because though we're not trying to make you an entrepreneur, we want you to think like an entrepreneur. Because when you're thinking entrepreneurial and you're working at our companies or working at a company, then you're going to utilize resources differently. You're going to be more innovative and creative. So the entrepreneurial thinking piece is very key for what employers want for their companies today so that they can be competitive. And finally, leadership. You may not ever have a career, you may not ever have a role where you want to lead others. However, you have to first lead yourself. So what are you doing to prepare yourself to make sure that you are staying on top of the game in terms of the current trends? You're being a leader. How are you developing yourself, or how are you seeking out resources to be developed? That's what leadership means. So it's leading self first, whether you're leading a team or leading an organization. Now that you've heard me say that, we have one more poll. And that poll is, what do you think is the most important skill needed to be successful for a career in industry? So if you could do that poll and share your thoughts. What do you think is the most important skill needed to be successful in industry? Don't worry about trying to copy everything down now. We will have a summary slide, summary reports for all of the information that will be sent out to all of the attendees. So all of the information that you will have or that you're seeing on the slide will be provided for you. And how do you highlight transferable skills on a resume? That question, when you're thinking about your resume, you think about what it is that you have done, you look at what is needed, and then is it applicable? And so how you highlight them, it's not necessarily a matter of highlighting a transferable skill, it's really highlighting what you have done and how you have made that accomplishment and the skills or the tools that you've used with that accomplishment. So we get caught up a little bit in the wording of transferable skills, but it actually is how you're getting your work done. I hope that answered your question. And then we had another question come in as you are filling in the rest of the poll. Is it difficult for a non-US citizen to get a job in a governmental lab? That part I would have to defer. I mean, I can I can get you follow-up information on that one. because I think that does go into several visa requirements that you'll have to have and working in the lab. So I will take a note and make sure that we put that in the resources and answer that question there. But thank you for submitting that question. So it looks like we have a tie, or close to a tie. So most of you are thinking that critical thinking is one of the most important skills, and others are communication. There are no right or wrong answers to this particular poll question. It really was a way for me to gauge where your thoughts were and how you're thinking or how you're looking at key skills that employers want. It also lets us know maybe some particular areas that we want to look into for future webinars, and how do we build on some of these skill sets. So critical thinking is definitely a key one, as well as communication. So here's another one that people, when you are on the job market, it happened when I was going through, it's still happening today. You get a little antsy about, why is this taking so long? Why is it, I've not heard back from them. I applied and I've not heard anything. What does that mean? Well, rest assured, we would like for it to happen very quickly, but the average job process in getting the job, it takes from 6 to 12 months, but the process can take from 3 weeks. Some people have it a very, very quick fill. Others, it could take 18 plus months. But what does that process look like? Let's take a look at that. So you're first starting out by applying. You're first starting out with the application process. And with the application process, as we talked about as a part of your strategy, you'll go to job boards, you'll go to company websites, you'll find them at conferences, and referrals. So there may be some cases where you're not actually physically applying, but someone has referred you for a particular role and you may get contacted. Then after you apply, then there's a screening process. What happens during the screening process is this. It may be a surprise to some of you, it may not be. But during the screening process, this is where HR professionals, your recruiters, and sometimes the hiring managers are in at this process in stage 2. They're screening candidates for particular positions. And they'll review your resume, they'll do a Google check, and yes, they will do a Google check to see, what's out there. Who is this person? And then as a final part of the screening process, you have the phone screen, and what's becoming even more popular now are the video conference interviews, so your Skypes or your Zooms. So once you've applied, then you have the screen, and then after the screening process, if you make it through, we'll just put it that way, if you make it through the screening process, that then takes you for an invitation to an on-site interview. That's where you will give your technical presentation, which is typically about 30 to 45 minutes, that you'll be able to present your work that you've done. You also will have the behavioral assessments, or the behavioral interviews. So they may not ask you specific questions, but they will definitely be observing how you react to certain situations, or even to certain questions that they will give you throughout the day. And you also, in most cases, you'll get a chance to view or visit the site. So you'll get a site tour. Applying, screen process, the on-site interview, and then after the on-site interview, the next step is the offer. So if you've made it through each of those steps, and then and then you get to the offer, you'll get a letter. Typically, you'll get an email, a phone call or an email first, but you'll get the letter that states what the offer is. You can go through the negotiation process, and once you've successfully gone through all of those, you set your start date and you begin as an employee of that particular company. Now, those were the steps. Pretty straightforward and simple, but I also want you to see the timing that could go into each of those steps to give you some realistic expectations. So from that application process to the screening process, it could take a few days, or it could literally take months before and between the time that you apply for a job and someone gets back to you. So don't be discouraged if you apply and you're applying and you never hear back from someone within the next couple of weeks. It's out there. There's several people out there who are also vying for those positions. And sometimes it just takes time to weed through and go through the screening process. After you get through the screening process and you're going from the screening to getting that on-site interview, that could be a short period of time too, 1 month, or it could be 3 months. It could be longer, but on average, you'll typically hear back from that phone screen or video screen within the month or two if they're going to invite you to that on-site interview. Between the on-site interview and the offer, however, that's where we really, really get a little antsy because that process could be anywhere from 1 month to 9 months. And there are a variety of reasons for that. It could even be longer depending upon the nature of the business. I'm sure you've heard people talk about, my company has a freeze, or they did have this job posted, but now they had to kill it. All of those are things that can happen between the time that you've had your on-site interview and the time in which you receive that offer. So though it is a little bit uncomfortable, I want you to understand the process and what's actually happening. What happens between that on-site interview and them extending you the offer, there may be several channels that they have to go through within their company or within their business lines to get some more approvals. So it takes time. From us on the outside looking in, we want it to be, hurry up, snap, snapping in a hurry. But there is a process that's involved. And again, because of the nature of the business, because the business is driven by the targets and the sales and the revenue and projects, you may have started out as an ideal candidate because they need that position. By the time you get to the on-site interview and them extending the offer, however, the business needs may have changed. And it's nothing against you because you're still a great candidate, you're still very smart, intelligent, and are marketable, just not fitting the needs for that particular company or for that particular industry right then. So don't get discouraged if those types of things happen. It's just the nature of the business. So you've applied, and let's talk now a little bit about the process for the interview, because while resumes get you the interviews actually land the offers. So what are some of the things that you want to think about when you are preparing for your interview? First of all, I want you to relax. I know it seems crazy for me to say relax when you're going into an interview. If this is really something that you want to do after you've spent all of those years in school, you really need to get a job. Relax. If you are relaxed when you go into your interview, then you will do much better. What are some of the ways that you can relax? I know we all want to look good when we go into the interview, but it may not be the best of ideas to go out and purchase a brand new outfit that we don't feel comfortable in the day or two before your interview. Small things. Relax. Wear something that you feel comfortable in. Still very professional, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you just bought the day before because it may not fit. And you don't want to be uptight. You want to be as comfortable as possible when you're going into your interview. And the next thing, again, going back to your job search and job strategy, is knowing yourself and knowing your resume. I can't tell you how many times I've seen students, I've seen people come in to interview, and when we interview them, we're like, are you the same person who we talked to on the phone and we're looking at this resume? You need to know your resume cold. If you put something on your resume, then you need to be able to explain it. And the difference between you passing that phone screen interview and your in-person interview, with the phone screen or even on the Skype, you have the opportunity to look at your resume. When you're in the actual interview process, you won't have that luxury. So you really need to know you, your strengths, and know yourself, know your resume. Because the last thing that you want is to show up for an on-site interview and not be able to clearly articulate what it is that you have done. You also want to become familiar with the company and what they do. You don't want to know everything about them because you want to be able to ask questions. So with the interview process, make sure that you are open. Make sure that you're conversational. You're interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. So while it may be a little hard for you to relax, if you think about this as a conversation, then you will do much better in your interview process. Listen carefully. I can't emphasize that one enough. So many times we go into our interviews and we have read so many prep books or questions about what they're going to ask that we don't listen when we actually get into the interview to listen to what they're actually asking you. Listen carefully, because that may be a little curveball that they're trying to throw where you already have your answer prepared based on what you've read and studied, but that's not really what they have asked you. So listen carefully and then answer what is asked. 6 quick tips. The 7th one is golden. Practice. Practice, practice, practice. Practice with your friends, practice with your mentors, practice with mentees, practice with your family. But the most important thing is that you continue to practice, because the interview is what's going to get you that offer. That's what's going to set you apart from anyone else that has applied for that particular job or role. Next couple of slides as we kind of are coming to the end here. So again, I want to remind you, if you have any questions, please submit them. Please share your questions and then we can have a bit of a discussion afterwards. So we have a couple of more slides to go through, but I really want to be able to answer your questions. So what do you want to know about industry? What do you want to know about your success strategies? Your digital footprint is very important. It's important when you are starting out on your job. It's important when you're in your job, because social networking, regardless of what it used to be in the past, social networking is a means of professional development. And so what does that mean? Is that you need to create a LinkedIn profile and you need to create, or a Twitter profile. I can understand if you don't want to do Twitter, that's fine, but I can't tell you how many opportunities and collaborations and job opportunities that people have made and connected on Twitter. It's pretty amazing. Now, if you don't know how to use Twitter, that may be one thing, but give it an opportunity, give it a chance, kind of linger around on it. But definitely create a LinkedIn profile. Definitely you want to create your LinkedIn profile. And once you create your LinkedIn profile or your Twitter profiles, then follow and connect with key users or influencers in your specific area. So if there's somebody who works at a company and they're on social media, follow them. What are they talking about? Particularly on their LinkedIn profiles. What type of articles are they posting? What type of things are they sharing that they feel that people need to know? And then like it, share the information. And then you can also post information that you found relevant on job searching or job tips. Participate in discussions. Now, here's the part where it becomes a professional development tool. And for those of you who are graduate students or undergraduates and you have research, your social media platforms are actually great ways to build your brand and to share the work that you're doing. People will take notice of you. This is how you begin to, as I said, build your brand and you become known in a particular area. Participate in discussions. You never know who may need some information. Now, mind you, I'm a couple of years from my PhD and my research work, but just this weekend, I was telling people what my thesis was on, and the current graduate student was like, hey, I'm having problems doing that. Can you give me some tips? And we never would have had that had we not had some of those social media discussions. So it's very important for you to participate. It's not just about what you did over the weekend or what concert you went to see or snapping pictures of some great meal that you just ate. Utilize social media to your advantage. You know, the world is now open. Social media has opened up worlds of opportunities for linking people who we never probably would have ever been able to meet. But we can meet on some of our social media platforms. I don't have to see you every day. I don't have to walk, by your office every day, but I can connect with you on our social media platforms and we can have meaningful discussions. And if you're on the job scene, and I know this may seem like a lot, but begin to communicate with about 3 to 5 contacts per week. So if you have all of these contacts on LinkedIn, if you have 500, 1,000 plus people in your LinkedIn community or network, how are you utilizing that network? Reach out to them, communicate with them. It doesn't have to be anything major. Communication could be simply tagging them on an article that you read that you think is of interest to them, Or it could mean sending a quick note to say, hey, I am in my final year of graduate school. We met at this conference a couple of years back. Just wanted to touch bases with you to let you know my progress. And this is what I'm doing. Doesn't have to be anything major, but make some type of connection and communicate with them. And remember, despite all of the good that happens with our digital footprint and how we can use it to our advantage, there still is a caution that we have to give that our digital footprint is in cyber ink, meaning that it's permanent. Once it's out there, it's out there. You can delete it, but there is this thing called a cache, and there's actually a website that is called, I think it's Time Machine or something, but they house old websites or old posts. So nothing ever really goes away when it's on the internet or when it's in social media. So though you want to share, you also want to be mindful of how you're participating and how you're conducting yourself on social media platforms. And finally, for those of you, I know there's a percentage of the listening audience here that are already working, and you want to learn about how do you strategize yourself to move up the ladder in industry, or how do you move. The next couple of things that I'm going to share definitely applies to you, but it also applies to people who are just starting out. And so the first thing is, when you're thinking about learning and growing and performing once you start your job, is get clarity on the expectations for your performance. That's very key in industry because you are evaluated on your performance. Performance is linked to business goals. And so you want to make sure that you're not just off doing something that's not in alignment with what your management or with your manager's line or the business wants you to be doing and performing. So getting clarity up front is key on the expectations. The next thing is, once you're there, your first couple of years on the job, though, you want to move, you want to grow, that's great. You have your long-term vision. I caution you, though, to make sure that in pursuing your long-term goals, that you don't forget that you have to demonstrate proficiency and deliver results. And so your first 1, 2, maybe even 3 years at the company really should be spent on delivering results and demonstrating your proficiency in your specific area. And that's not to say that you don't learn other things and you're not able to explore, but before you're ready to grow and be promoted, because remember, or for some of you, it may not even be a remember, it's a, hey, here's the key. Promotion means that you're performing at the next level. So once you've demonstrated not only proficiency at your level, but you're performing at the next level, that's when promotion happens. Promotion doesn't happen just because you've been in the company for 5 years and you're like, well, I've been here for 5 years. It's time for me to be promoted to the next level. That's not how it works, unfortunately. You're promoted when you're demonstrating and working at the next level. And so how do you start to do that? Yes, you're 1 to 2, maybe even 3 years, you're demonstrating your proficiency. In the midst of all that, you want to learn about the organization more than just where you are, because you want to see where your research and how your work applies to the business and how it's advancing the business. So make sure that you're interacting with people, that you're talking to your management and learning about the organization more than just how to do your specific job. And then you can start to apply those learned skills and knowledge in a variety of environments, not just where you are. And that's how you start to learn where you want to go, you're performing, and how you can grow. And don't be afraid of taking stretch assignments, taking those assignments that I didn't go to school to do this. I don't know this. Do I need to go back and take some courses on this? No, stretch assignments are meant to do just that. As a researcher, you have those certain skills. Remember, we talked about critical thinking skills. Stretching means that it's stretching you to your max, where you will be taking on all of those skills that you have and applying them to a particular or a new project or special assignment. And then don't be afraid of a lateral move. It may not necessarily be a promotion, but it's a move at the same level in another department. All of those are things that you're starting to build, to learn, and to grow, and that's what's setting you up for promotions, right? So it's not just the work that you're doing, and it's not just the depth that allows you to have promotions, but it's also the breadth. Hope that answered your question about how you begin to strategize and setting up for moving up the ladder in industry. It's when you're able to um, take the knowledge that you have in your area and see how it fits in other areas where you're building your network, where you're learning about various parts of the company and the organization, as well as, again, demonstrating your proficiency and being known for your technical expertise. Now, all of that comes to an end, and this is it's a plug, if you will. I have a podcast. It's a weekly podcast. And for those of you who want to know more about careers beyond the bench, I have a podcast where I interview people and they talk about their careers. And it's been very enlightening for them to be able to share their journey, to share their path about the things that they experience in industry. And most of the people have been industrial careers because the whole point of the podcast was beyond the bench. So what are you going to do, or what can you do with a degree in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, whether it's a PhD or a bachelor's? What are some of your career options? And so we have those stimulating career conversations. So if you have an opportunity, check out an episode or so. I'm into my second year, and I've interviewed people from industry. I've interviewed people in government. I've interviewed people who are in the academy, but they've gone on the higher ed side. Then that may be something else that you want to do. Sometimes higher ed can be equivalent to an industrial job, but it's still within the academic sector. And finally, if you have any questions or you want to reach out or contact me, then you can do so. My information, my email, visit my website, my phone, connect with me on any social media platform, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's at Dr. Qualls. I'll give you a second to copy that down if you want to. And then finally, as we wrap up, I want to remind you that you will receive an email sometime this week about this particular webinar, and there will be a survey link. Please, please, please complete that survey link, because your input and the things that you share on that survey will help determine future topics. You'll also receive a recording of the webinar. So as you ask, if the slides will be presented, you will receive a webinar recording, a link so you can listen to the whole session over. And then from some of the questions, I know there's some follow-up that I'll have to do from some of the questions. There'll be some resources available that either I or AAAS or someone maybe from the ERN organization will be able to share as it relates to tips on the successful careers. But as always, please be sure to visit the AAAS Science Careers at sciencemag.org/careers for additional resources and information. And I just want to thank the ERN program staff for allowing me to come on and share some tips for successful careers in industry, going through the process, making sure that you understand the culture. So of course, I'm going to thank Ms. Yolanda George, the Deputy Director of Education and Human Resources, the PI for the ERN Conference in STEM, the Iris Wagstaff, the STEM Program Director, and in Education and Human Resources, Quincy Brown, the Program Director, STEM Education, Research and Education, and Tarek Clayton, who has been a godsend in helping me to navigate through the webinar today, but he's a Program Associate in Education Research and Education. And with that, I will start to look at your questions and answer them. Please continue to have the questions. If we don't have an opportunity to answer all of the questions, this will also be something that we can follow up in resources in the resource section where I'm answering the questions. So we do have several that have come in. And the question is, how much research, undergrad to PhD work, do you highlight? If you are a PhD student and you have on your resume the things that you have done, we need to see a comprehensive picture of the work that you have done. If you're going in your PhD and you've also done undergraduate research, that undergraduate research is important, but you really want to focus on your PhD work. We want to see that, hey, you've done research in your undergraduate career, but unless that undergraduate research is really relevant to your PhD work, you don't want to spend a lot of time focusing on that. Here's another rule of thumb. So if you think about your resume, and hopefully you can see this paper, whatever's on the top third, basically eye view of that paper when you're doing your resume, those are the things that are most important. That's where you want to capture the most important things that you want the reader to see and know about you. And then everything else should be supporting information to support and go into more details about those things. Hope that answered your question. If not, you can type it back in. We did discuss the how do you strategize to move up the ladder in industry. Again, it's all about demonstrating your proficiency, your technical expertise, getting the breadth, understanding what's happening in the organization and where you fit in each of those particular areas. You know, like what are the business needs? What's important? And why is this important to the business, my area? And once you start to understand and demonstrate that, then you're going to be able to move up the ladder, because it's not just one area. Because as you go up in industry, you're going to be over more departments, more people, more work projects. And so you really have to have a better understanding of what's going on in other areas and not just your one specific area. Let's see. What else do we have here? Thank you for sending in questions. It's always good. It at least feels as though it's two-way. Is there any way to recover from giving a bad answer during an interview? Well, that depends on what you consider a bad answer. If it's, always remember this, your nerves are going to be high, and that's why I say do things that help you to relax up front. If you give an answer and you say, you know, this is not what I really wanted to say, or you kind of stumble over some things, take a pause and say, hey, I'd like to start over, and then start over with your answer. If you give a wrong answer, like something that is clearly not right, if it's something technical and you start talking and haven't really thought through the answer, you're just kind of talking to be talking, and then you realize at the end, like, oh my gosh, that was completely wrong. That one, on the other hand, is a little bit more why you need to think and listen carefully before you answer questions. But even if that happens, you can kind of go back and you kind of go back and say, you know what, as I think more about that, that's not exactly right. What really happens is X, Y, Z. So there's always an opportunity for you to course correct if you know that you have indeed given an incorrect answer. If it's something just as a matter of stumbling and just your nerves, stop, take a deep breath, and then you can recover. Let's see. We have more questions coming in. If you give me just a second to read through. How often do people get hired without having a reference on the inside? It actually happens quite often. It is, you don't always know someone in the company. And so it really is a matter of how you're demonstrating your skill set. Now, I will say it is good to know someone and you have referrals, but people aren't hired exclusively just because they know someone on the inside. Even if you know someone on the inside and you have a reference, you're still going through the process, and there still is an opportunity for someone out there to one up you. They're more prepared, they give a better interview. So it's not just because you know someone that they can bring you on. You still have to go through the process or the hiring process, which is why networking is important. You may not know someone at that particular company, but you may have met someone who is in that industry who knows someone at that company and can also speak to your research or to your skill set or to your talents. That's why it's always important when you go to conferences or you go to career fairs that you are networking and then you are sharing what it is that you do. Next question. And I think we're almost at time here. And we will take one more question and then we'll kind of wrap up. But I do encourage you to continue to submit your questions in, and I'll go back through and I'll answer all of these questions about what is a researcher, No, I think I've answered. I think I've answered pretty much all of them. That's cool. So with that, I will say once again, thank you for joining in. I hope that you learned some tips. You can kind of let me know as you're leaving out. Is there anything else? Oh, wait, here's another question before we leave. And this question, I just lost it. It was something about volunteering. Yes. Okay. Is volunteer work something to highlight on resumes, even if it is not related to research? So, yes, and maybe. And I answer the question yes and maybe because volunteer work starts to show another side of you. It starts to show your leadership side. And so when you're talking about again, it goes back to when you do the research on the company, what's important to that company? What are some of the skills and what do they need? And so if they really value, if they're a company that values volunteer work and giving back and corporate and social responsibility, then there may be something on your resume and the volunteer work that you're doing that fits very well within the culture of that particular organization. So yes, of course, you want to highlight that or you want to share that on your resume because remember, resumes get interviews. And so if I'm looking at your resume and I see something that's aligned with the value on of my company, then I'm definitely going to want to talk to you. So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully you'll be able to use those volunteer positions or volunteer opportunities or volunteer experience very strategic on your resume. And last question is going into industry, is a bachelor's degree enough or is a master's or PhD preferred? Going into industry, we have a variety of positions. We have positions for actually non-degree people who serve mostly as technicians. Bachelor's degrees will also come in serving as technicians with just a little bit more responsibility. Their masters and PhDs, once you have those advanced degrees, then you are able to do more specialized work and more critical thinking work and designing their own experiments as it relates to the business needs. So short answer to your question, yes, a bachelor's degree will allow you to work in industry. It really just depends on what you want to do. Because with your bachelor's degree, you're basically going to have roles that are more bachelor's degree in research fields. Let me qualify that. Bachelor's degrees in research fields or the bench or laboratory experiments, you're doing things that will basically be pretty routine. Not a lot of thought going into the design of the experiments or how you're reaching out to other areas. It really is, I'm going to go in, I'm going to run these samples, and then I'm going to go home. So if that's what you want, then yes, there are plenty of opportunities out there available for that. Well, thank you again. Questions that are added but not answered can be added to the post-conference frequently asked questions. So please check your follow-up emails and the website for any questions that we may not have been able to answer, as well as to the answers to the questions that we did. So with that, thank you again for joining in, and I look forward to following up with you on Twitter or by email or any other way that you'd like to reach out or contact me, and also hopefully seeing you at the ERN conference in the winter, in February. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.